Good evening, everyone, or good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Pui Peng. Welcome all of you to the webinar, Power Reconnected, Revitalising the Battersea Power Station in London. This is rather exciting because Battersea Power Station has been a very important and iconic building in the landscape of London. And the project has taken such a long time. I really can't wait to see the end and the revitalized project soon. And for revitalizing historic buildings, there are many major challenges, especially to meet the modern social needs and the benefits to the community, while not sacrificing the valuable historical elements and uniqueness of the architecture. So for this particular webinar, really very happy to have two directors from WilkinsonEyre, the Director of WilkinsonEyre and Wilkinson Hong Kong, Matthew Porter, and the Director of WilkinsonEyre, Sebastien Ricard. Both of them will be speaking on the project and take us through their thought process, their design measures, their innovation, and also their conservation scale. So take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Professor Ho. It's a pleasure to be talking about Battersea. I'm not going to do much talking. I'm going to leave it to Sebastien, who's been living this project for years. But just to really introduce WilkinsonEyre, we're a practice that started in London. We have permanent offices in Hong Kong and Sydney. And I think there's a view there of Battersea Power Station. Sebastien has started sharing his screen. I just wanted to talk very quickly about our approach to conservation projects. We really enjoy working with historic structures, and there's always a range. There's always a different way of approaching projects according to what the heritage structure is. So on the left is the Western Library, a project by Gilbert Scott, who's the same architect as for the Battersea Power Station. And it used to be a book depot, but we really pulled out the inside. We drew people in. We made it much more publicly accessible. We showed them parts of the building that they've never seen before and rejuvenated it as a library. In the top right is a project that we did in King's Cross. These are the grade 2 listed gas holders, part of the iconic silhouettes of London. And obviously we don't need gas holders anymore, but we were asked to put residential buildings, 3 residential buildings within these cast iron structures. And we really wanted to try and reinvent, to provide a new lease of life to these extraordinary historic structures. And so get people up closer to them to see the detail and the engineering. And then at the bottom, a project that we did in Bath, which is obviously a UNESCO heritage site. It was a railway station. It's still a railway station. We're keeping the original use, but we're adjusting it. We're making the arches publicly accessible. They provide amenity to the public square, and it's just a different way, sliding the scale from restoration and conservation up to reinvention. And Sebastien is going to talk about where Battersea Power Station sits on that particular sliding scale now.
Thank you very much, Matthew. So yes, I'm going to tell you about Battersea Power Station. So we got involved in 2013 through a design competition. First thing to say about the project is it's a project which was built across quite a few years. The first part, the first half, in the 30s, so it's a kind of golden era of electricity when electricity was a very high-tech technology, and then the second part, the second half, through the Second World War, just before and after the Second World War. From the inside, you can really see the difference because the first part is really reflective of the kind of Art Deco style, a lot of flamboyant detail. And the second part is much more of an utilitarian, still beautiful, but modernist power station architecture, very horizontal shapes and form. When we got involved in 2013, this project was in that state. So way more than just a traditional refurbishment project, as Matthew mentioned earlier on. It was about rethinking what you could do with a building of that scale. I mean, just to give you an idea of scale, this building is 3 times bigger than Tate Modern, the main museum that we've got, which also was done by Gilbert Scott on the east side of London. So this is the power station on the west side of London. So major piece of infrastructure. So in order to really think about the sheer scale of the building and the regeneration of that building and how could you put it back to life with the right activity, it needs to be taken in the context of the overall site. So it's a big master plan. It's got 7 phases. And actually, fundamentally, the reality is to enable the sheer scale of the restoration of that project, you need to create value in a much wider sense of the term than just the pure restoration of the building. So effectively, this site, which is basically owned by a consortium of Malaysian shareholders, is including at this R, the power station, which is basically the building surrounding by the circular road, which we call the Yellow Road and the park. So this is all the zone that WilkinsonEyre are in charge of. And then it's across that, there is the first phase, which is completed now, which is about 600 residential units. Phase 3, which is Park Gary, Park Foster, which is under construction, and phase 4, 5, 6, 7, which are future phases and include also a new tube stop and tube station for the Northern Line. And this is how it sits within the context of central London. So one of the last major piece of empty land or developable land in London. So that's why it's such an important site, and probably one of the biggest kind of private funded development in Europe at the moment on the go. So how did we approach the building when we started to get involved? So the key thing for us, and the key things which really strike me when I saw the building the first time, was 2 fundamental things. One is the idea of scale. And it's a very unusual thing to have a building of that scale. And the other thing was actually the beautiful kind of industrial architecture. So the sample, industrial, brutalistic a bit architecture. So we're very keen to retain those elements within the proposal. So one, for instance, the image on the left is to show the fact that within the turbine hall, even if we had to provide kind of link, escalator or bridges, the idea was to always retain the idea of scale and not to break the full volume. And on the right-hand side, this idea is that maybe when you enter the building, you can expose the full facade as it stands and don't over-restore it and set away all the new intervention from it. So this idea of the box in a box. Also, the things, this is a 150 meter long by 150 meter wide building. So effectively a major piece of roofing. So it was all about trying to see beyond the groundscape, beyond the volume at the base of the building. You know, there's all those intricate and beautiful spaces, and let's use as much as we can on the roofscape. And we came out with this idea of this kind of Eden villa in the sky set of property in there. And as I mentioned, the kind of utilizing all the roofs. So we're creating basically green roof amenity for the office worker, for the resident, for the member of the public on most of the roof of the building. So to take an undertaking like that, one of the things that you need to do with a building of that scale is to try to find the right mix and to try to effectively make it a sustainable development. So in order to make it a sustainable development, you need to create a lot of function in this building, because the scale of the undertaking of restoration is major. And so, you know, it wouldn't be viable to just say, oh, we do a bit of exhibition space in there. So what we did, and what's one of the things I'm specifically proud of actually, is the fact that this building is a real mixed-use scheme in a noble sense of the term. So you're going to have in there what you have in blue in the center of that section here is the office element. So that's 45,000 square meters of offices, which Apple are taking for their kind of European campus. To give you an idea of scale, 45,000 square meters, it's the size of the Gherkin, which is a major tower in central London. You've got in green here all the retail area, which is about 150 shops, which are cutting across the 2 main turbine halls. And then you've got in purple the residential property. So it's about 252 very high-end residential property, including 34 villas and a few penthouses on the top. And then you've got sandwich in between the retail and the office, some event space, so a multiplex cinema, a food hall court, and an event box, as well as a chimney lift experience, which in one of the chimney you will be able to go in a glass lift, which gives you a 360-degree view towards London. So a mix of very interesting use throughout the building. To undertake a restoration work like that, we went through a very extensive survey. So this is a 3D cloud survey. So effectively, we've got very pristine and precise information on each of the aspects of the building. So this is some example of some of the repair work and restoration work, enabling us to make a full report on all the state of each component of the building, allowing us to decide how we repair and restore each of the components, not over restoring it, but making sure we make it safe. And in specific area, we have some different strategy and more precise restoration strategy. So the building itself, the external works, the external ground, the main entrances to the building will be from the south, which were through a piazza, which we call Malaysian Square Public Piazza, directly from the new tube stop on the south side, or through this major piece of public ground now, a nice public park that we're doing on the north side, just next, alongside the river. So this south side, we're creating a piazza called Malaysian Square, which we design as a kind of Spanish step piazza, so very open, where people can sit, can enjoy a show. You could have some artist intervention. You know, you can basically populate it with different activity throughout the years, curate it as a piece of museum, really. So those are some of the recent images of the work in progress. So this idea of those steps becoming wall and all done with granite, different type of granite, very interesting set so done with what we call CNC cut. So it's basically all generated from computer cut and cutting the stones so they can be perfectly cut and become cladding for the wall. And then from the north, you've got this park where you enter to the building through the existing opening underneath this massive terrace, which is directly a breakout space from the event space on level 2. When you enter the building, then you get to the retail area. So as I mentioned earlier on, it's basically cutting across the 2 main turbine halls, so where all the turbine used to be. So the control room, turbine hall A and turbine hall B, we've got effectively a series of shops on either side in between the existing colonnade. So this was turbine hall A as it stands. So a lot of beautiful faience, detail, refined, and what we're doing within that volume is created a series of walkways with a series of bridges cutting across the turbine hall, allowing you to go in between shops. So some of the work in progress images I'm going to show you. So that's the state of the building. So we can start to really feel now the beautiful restoration work and the new intervention, the new shops coming in, with some really pristine restoration work done to the faience. We've restored the window to the control room A, which is one of the most important historic space within the building, and we've created those kind of new metal railing reflective of this kind of Art Deco style of the 13. We've also made some interesting intervention. For instance, to link to the control room A, we've suspended a footbridge to one of the existing gantry crane. We used to roll around from north to south to the turbine hall to bring goods in the space. So we used that opportunity because it was designed to take very heavy loading to suspend the bridge. So a nice piece of fun within that space. So those are work in progress photo of those walkways. Turbine hall B, which is, as I mentioned earlier on, a very different architecture, very, very beautiful as well, but with much less natural light, because this was actually kind of natural light when actually the building was derelict and the roof had collapsed to the central part of the building. And where in a similar manner, we are bringing basically shops within the existing framework of the building with walkways cutting across the space. And so those are images, and this is some work in progress of those of that space. With again in the middle, we've got a very beautiful control room, which is called Control Room B. So very much like a Doctor Who style control room with a set of amazing stainless steel panel, which this is a work in progress thing. So we've done now a full restoration of all those panels, and all those panels will be on show within the retail environment, so everybody will be able to see those space. And the only thing we're doing is basically bringing a very subtle curved glass panel in front of it to avoid obviously touching the control system. A few other elements very interesting within that space. You've got, for instance, this what we call the VIP bar, which was another control room at the northern end of the space, where we've now refurbished totally all the glazing frame and put some new glazing panel, and then we are in the process of refurbishing the horloge, the clock above it. Another way of creating some animation in that space, we've created a bandstand, so a kind of glass box within this turbine hall B, which again is suspended from the gantry crane. The idea is that that box is done with an LED screen, allowing the fact that you can project on it, you can have some kind of material, art, projection, video, and as well you can use it for launching up a new project inside of having people in there. So this is work in progress of that bandstand in construction. The boiler house itself, volume, as I mentioned earlier on, the entrance, we're going through this idea of restoring but not over restoring it, just maintaining the kind of slightly decayed facade, showing basically the time and the industrial heritage of that facade. And we use a bowstring system, this kind of very elegant thin set of cable in tension, which normally is used to support the glass facade to retain the facade in situ and creating a full height atrium space. So those are some of the image rendering we did at the time, and those are some of the first reveal of that space on the top. So with really interesting lighting effects, something which really we start to get the feel of that space. It's becoming magic. At the middle of the building, as I mentioned earlier on, we've got sandwiched this event space. A very interesting challenge, again, speaking about the inadequacy of the building and the envelope itself with the function in there. It's very tricky to be able to create a massive volume column-free, enabling all the show you could put in there when you have 6 stories of offices to support above that, plus 2 stories of residential. So we created this kind of idea of those 3 columns, which support 6 column grid of the office space above it, down to 1 grid below, allowing us to have this major box for events without any column in there. So a very interesting piece of infrastructure, the idea being that from the ground floor, you can have this kind of red carpet event and you could have some major event being done in there. And when you arrive at the landing point of the event space, then you can turn around and you have this box, which again, we've created to make it specific to the building. We've created this major triple glaze facade into it, allowing basically people to be able to see even with the space and not always have a relationship with the existing building. So you don't feel you're in the middle of a central London hotel, you are in the power station. And those are some work in progress shots of those trees, allowing us to have these column-free spaces in the space. And those are some of the progress shot of the bridges suspended in the space, allowing you to enter that event space. And those are some detailed design of the mock-up we did for this triple glaze system, allowing a perfect acoustically sealed box, but still having this transparency to the existing building. Control room A directly linked from that space where I show you these bridges cutting across Turbine Olay is one of the most famous space and well-known space in the power station. For the people who've seen the King's speech, there's a very famous scene in there where the King is learning his speech in that room. And the idea will be that this space is going to be used for temporary events, very curated events, low density event to make sure, again, we maintain the quality of the space and we don't destroy some of the most interesting heritage pieces and all those control panels. This space used to control about 1/3 of the electricity in London when it was in use. So then now if we enter the office part, so a very unusual office space for central London. Each of the floor plates are in the region of 7,500 square meters, so bigger than any kind of floor plate of the tower, a big of a kind of industrial feel to it, the workshop, workspace, which is something that Apple were very interested in, this idea that it's more like a studio-like arrangement rather than a traditional office area. Give you an idea of scale, as I mentioned earlier on, this is 150 meter long. There's an atrium space, which is 80 meter wide, long, and 20 meter wide. So the scale of a big street like Regent Street, for instance, in central London. Other thing which is very unusual, quite common in Asia, but not really in Europe, is you enter the office space through a sky lobby. So you have a small lobby within the retail environment, a 200 square meter lobby. From that, you take a set of full climber lift, which bring you on level 5, and where from here you are distributed to any of the floor plate, the 6th floor plate level above that. So relatively small entrance lobby for an office space of that scale. And then through a set of wall climbing lift, you enter into this enormous atrium space, which, as I mentioned, is about the scale of Regent Street. So it's a 6-story high street, effectively internal street within that space. And this is a typical floor plan. So major set of area where we expose the brickwork on the inside and where all the services can be exposed. This is quite confidential. Apple are fitting it out at the moment, so I can't really show you any internal fit-out image, but that'll give you an idea of what the project is about. We also did some very interesting interventions. So in order to bring some natural light within the facade, on the front facade, the north and the south elevation, we created those very thin vertical slot. So again, trying to play and to work with the existing fabric, making sure that we are very sympathetic to that fabric and creating very subtle openings, very thin opening, which work with the modernity of the building itself. The residential aspect, another big element. So we've already delivered more than 100 flats within Switch House West, which is the part on the west side where people are living already in the building. And we are delivering next week the second part, which is Switch House East. So that's going to come live within the next few weeks. And the boiler house villa will come in the next 2 to 3 months. So for each of those elements on either side, Switch House East and West, most of the residential property are within the existing fabric, and we've got 3 stories of extension, new property above that. So, and then the boiler house itself is a series of villas, effectively duplex independent villas with gardens. So the villa will have a very interesting entry sequence. So the people will have their lobby at the base of what we call the watchtower, which is effectively the kind of brick tower supporting the chimney. And through a kind of 24-meter high wall climber set of glass lifts cutting across the existing structure, they will land at the base of the chimney, and that will be their lobby before they can get to their property. So those are some shots rendering of those lobby. So a bit of a Mad Max feel, where you have those very modern glass lifts, but cutting across a kind of rusty steel structure with a bit of a crumbling brick and exposed concrete wall. So those are some of the images. So those amazing, beautiful piece of riveted structure, all of that will be exposed and on show within those spaces. And then when you arrive on the top, you've got that hidden world, a very beautiful set of hidden world. So what we wanted to do there is the existing the new facade proposed, a new extension to the outside, is very sleek glass facade, which really respond to the mass of the brick building below. So much more at the scale of the city, that external facade, whereas the internal facade, we wanted to bring some human scale, so to subdivide the residential property so you can really get the feeling that you have your own individual house, rather than feeling you are just having one unit as part of a big block. So the very important thing, this massive scale of the building versus a series of subdivision of small spaces, and bring the human scale in a building which has never been designed to have people living in there before. And then you've got those private garden, and this is actually the roof light of the office space that Apple are taking below. And there will be also private garden roof scale. And those are some of the property, some of the work in progress photos. So now we are putting all the landscape in those gardens. So it's becoming a quite exciting time now. And this is the external facade, which is this much sleeker glass facade. As I mentioned, we've already completed part of the development. So on the west side, you've got those beautiful rusty steel entrance portals leading you to those entrance volume, which are directly within existing fabric. So we've not over restoring again, where we expose the concrete and the roughness of the concrete against some very refined data. This is the new facade where we're creating all those openings which were never there before. And then on top of the roof of Turbine Alley, you've got those private gardens for the resident, communal garden for the resident, with again some duplexes on the new extension, which we redefine and re-subdivide the elevation on the internal side again to create this kind of human feel and scale within this massive envelope. And you could see on the left-hand side here, you've got actually the facade of the office space. None of those windows were there before. So all of those windows are new windows. We used to have very small windows, and so we've created all those big vertical slots to enable, of course, residential property. And within the space itself, you've got those beautiful corridor. And as I mentioned, some of those units are within existing fabric, and wherever we are in existing fabric, we always retain a visual relationship with the historic facade. So we've exposed, for instance, on the inside the brickwork, and created a palette of finishes. There's 2 palette of finishes for the residential property. One related to the 1940s kind of style, Art Deco, and one which is a much softer 1950s style, very sleek, very simple set of horizontal line. So that gives you some images. We've reused a lot of existing elements within the facade. So for instance, Here we had some big stanchion beam, which we needed to demolish. And what we've done is we've reused them for one of the residential lobby as a main reception desk. So for switch assist, so that becomes the main reception desk, the first thing you see when you enter the building. And again, this is the back wall of control room B, where we've cut the concrete and the steel and exposed all of that. Some of the existing switchgear equipment, we are bringing them back in the residential courtyard. So this is just one of the residential courtyards we've created, and we're bringing that back, and we will landscape all of that space. Now, specifically more talking about the repair of the building, there have been some really interesting and innovative solutions we've used for this restoration work. The main, what we call the boiler house building, so the building which is sitting between the 4 chimneys, the wall were actually in such a state that they were classified as a dangerous structure, so ready to collapse. So we had to rebuild them, and rather than rebuild them in a kind of man way brick by brick, we've actually created precast concrete panel with embedded bricks, so a proper brick in there, and reusing some of the existing bricks. So for instance, all the curve modellature you can see there, we've reused the historic brick that we dismantled to put them back on those panels and reinstall those precast concrete panel. And when you see it now, you wouldn't know that it's made with its new panel. They look like they've always been there. It's a very innovative system and allowing a very safe working environment at height, because we were working at 50 meters above ground for those construction. There's about 12 different types of brick within the building. So the restoration work was all about color matching of the brick and making sure that we create some kind of randomness within the juxtaposition of the 12 color of the brick to make sure that basically you wouldn't see the difference between where we had to put new brick versus where there were existing brick. Also, because the building was built in different phases, and because it was so vast, they had to change the brick across each of the facade, and therefore the blend of brick is different for each of the facades. So we had to look at all of that. And here, this is an example of how we did a lot of study to make sure we could color match the grouting of the brick, because that's obviously very important, again, to just show how we were going to be able to repair the brick and restore the brick. Another interesting fact is we've actually managed to find back the original fabricator who did the brick, and that company was going to shut down. And because the project is such a big project where we had a need for so many millions of brick, we ended up managing to keep that company alive just for the purpose of the project. It's a very nice story to be able to retain the original supplier of the brick and to keep them alive. And now it's a vibrant company. So this is just to show you some of the repair work. So that's before all the facade was cleaned. So you could still see all the difference, but it shows you the different typology of color of brick. And it shows you as well how important some of the repair work were. So here you've got what we call the concrete band, and that was in quite a bad state. So all the concrete band had been repaired, all the brickwork was repaired underneath it. So quite a lot of refined repair work. And this is some of the view now of those facades now that the repair has been completed. And a few shots as well to show you within this restoration work, we had a very different strategy for the new opening. So every time there is an opening which was reusing an existing opening, we create this crystal glaze unit system, so replicating a bit the 1930s style of window. And every time it's a brand new opening, well, we contrasted it with a very modern approach to it, a kind of a very sleek glass system. So those are kind of French window where you basically have a glass balustrade and the window can open fully behind. It's a glass door behind. So those are those kind of very interesting flush with a slight recess around them. So a kind of bronze frame around those windows. And the glass and the chimney lift on the building, which I just wanted to touch base on, is a very interesting piece. The idea being that you will have this kind of conic glass lift, which take about 30 people. And the idea would be that you have a ride for 10 minutes where you can go on top of the chimney. Those chimneys have all been rebuilt, by the way, because unfortunately, because of the kind of toxicity of the fumes which have come out of them across the years when it was used as a power station, all the reinforcement were rusted and were coming out. And so we had to basically rebuild them. It's a very innovative construction methodology at the time, because it's only a 250 to 300 millimeter thick concrete wall surround and a structure. And then when you think about it, it's a conic shape, which is 50 meter high. So 50 meter up in the air and 50 meter high, built out of a 250 to 300 millimeter concrete shell, all that back in the 30s. So very, very innovative. And we've rebuilt them using the same technology. So
I don't want to interrupt, Sebastien. But there's somebody showing me a sign that says 10 minutes. So
yeah, well, I will be much less than 10 minutes. I'm pretty much there. So, and just this is showing you as well some of the frame of to bring the new lift in, and those are some of the imagery of that lift, which we went in factory to inspect. It's going to be done in bronze structure to replicate again some of the historic architecture, and we have a series of rusty steel panels allowing you to get access to that chimney lift. And just to finish off, really, I just wanted to tell you a bit about this idea of this infrastructure and logistic, which was involved with a project of that scale. On the left-hand side here, you've got scaffolding, which was actually only used to decontaminate the building, so to take off the asbestos, which was across the turbine hall A and turbine hall B of the building. So, I call that the cathedral of scaffolding, and that was basically built. We had to decontaminate the building, and then we had to take off all that scaffolding down because, of course, it was contaminated by then, and we were not allowed to use it for restoring. And then when that's done, we could only then start to put back another scaffolding, and that you can see on the right-hand side, to do all the restoration work, because each of the tile inside the building have been mechanically fixed one by one to ensure that the building can be fit for purpose for the next 100 years. A few interesting pieces of steel as well. Here on the right-hand side, you've got a beam, which is a 62-ton beam installed to support basically the transfer structure for the office space. 62-ton as one beam is pretty exceptional, and was, I think, one of the most complex beams to install in a building in recent years in Europe anyway. There are also a lot of tunnel and tunneling underneath the building, which is to bring basically electricity and drag electricity across London. So we have to restore and retain some of this access for stats. And of course, what you see above ground is only a small fraction of what this building is about. It's a bit like a massive infrastructure, a bit like Canary Wharf in London, where actually you've got a set of service distribution underneath the building and underneath the side. To give you an idea of scale, there's 36 underground service bay for truck, to basically being able to park and deliver each of the 7 phases, which are all underneath our site and underneath and surrounding existing building. And that's it, really. That's give you a big overview. Those are some of the interesting site progress shots. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sebastien and Matthew. That's really very fascinating. I mean, the whole project. I think that's a lot of work in there, and a lot of issues that you have grappled with. And it's such a massive scale, as you always said. We have 20 minutes of question and answer. And right now we have about 6 or 7 questions in here. So I'll read them to you, and maybe Sebastien or Matthew would like to take it up and answer them. So the first question was Battersea Station, an iconic building, and everybody remembers it well. How do Londoners perceive the project, and what about people who used to work there?
Sorry, what is the question exactly?
So the question is, how do the Londoners perceive the project, and how about the people who used to work in that building?
So I think there's a very positive vibe about the project. I think, because for the first time, people will be able to go in the building and to visit the building. So that's something which is very special. Because even if everybody in London or even across Europe know the building, because they've seen the silhouette of the building when they arrive, even through the airport to London, effectively only the people who work there have been able to go inside. And for the first time, and you can start to see that now because the hoarding line is moving and the park is starting to open, you can see that people will be able to go touch the facade and go inside the building. So a lot of people are super excited about that, bringing back the building back to life and also opening it up to the public. I think that's one of the major elements of the project, is for the first time in its history, the building will be open to the public.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer. I think the project allows people accessibility, especially to some of the parts that you mentioned, right? The shopping mall and the open ground, and the lift going up to the chimney. I think that's really remarkable. The second question.
That was something that I was going to comment on, actually, is that I think that exactly as Sebastien said, I'm not going to comment on what Londoners think. I don't live in London, so who am I to say? But the prospect of being able to get up to these old buildings, I mean, the industrial heritage, we had it a little bit with the project in King's Cross that I'm more familiar with. The gas holders, it was never somewhere that you could go. It wasn't safe. It was fenced off. There was no way of getting up to this structure, and being able to go up and touch the brickwork or see the steel work and being able to see parts of the building that weren't even accessible to those who worked in it is what I think is really exciting. I think it gives a bit of London back to London.
Yeah, great. Yeah, the second question is, how does the project encourage urban regeneration in this part of London?
Well, I think definitively, probably all the regeneration around it wouldn't have happened if the kickstart wasn't the power station. And also, this is the project which enabled a new extension of the Northern Line tube line. So it's definitively a catalyst for regeneration of all that area. And I think that's the power of architecture, and we've been involved in a lot of regeneration projects across the years. I mean, Matthew was talking about Bath Southgate project earlier on. What we did there was we had the train station with no entrance piazza to the city, so everybody arriving in Bath were arriving at the train station, and straight away they were on the road. There were no public ground. What we did there is we opened up all the old arches, which were only actually structural arches to support the train track. We demolished all the earth and created this open piazza, which suddenly regenerated all that area and created a new center for Bath, relocated the center of the area from an area which used to be very derelict, where you had a lot of drug problem, and to an area which is now the new center of Bath. And I think that's what this regeneration project can be if we put the right ingredient. And it's not only about the architecture, but it's about the right development mix. And I'm a big believer in mixed-use scheme because that's what the future is about. You know, we have the after-war where it was all about, you've got the residential area, you've got the working place, you've got the industrial place, because it's polluted, we shouldn't mix them. I think now we're bringing back next to the river, where we used to have all those industrial buildings which used to pollute in the river. We all realized the amazing potential of the river. So we're bringing back people next to the river. We're bringing them back in industrial building. And that's the next generation of regeneration project, I think, is the reuse of all this industrial heritage, which is magnificent.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. One more question. How does the rich history of the historic site inspire your design and spatial setting?
Well, I don't know, Matthew, if you want to say something as well. I mean, do you want to start? Do you have something? I mean, I've got something to say, but if you want to say something, I'm more than interested to.
I'd never speak before you about Battersea Power Station, Sebastien. So
I wasn't necessarily only going to speak about Battersea Power Station, but I think there's two things probably which are interesting to mention there. One is the inadequacy of an existing building with the new function you want to bring in. So the quirkiness, as I call it. So the fact that, for instance, if you speak about the power station, it was a set of blank wall designed as a big long span structure to house a lot of big turbines. So it wasn't designed for human really as such, it was designed for machinery. And when you suddenly have that as a brief, and the client come and tell you, oh, you know what, we would like people to work there, to live there, by definition, the building is not fit for purpose. And actually, the fact that it's not fit for purpose is the beginning of the architecture adventure, is how do you create something magic and something unique, which will be unique by default, because the building wasn't designed for that. And that's usually a very good startup for the architecture. The second point is those heritage building are listed. And why are they listed? Because they were super innovative at the period they were made. They were the best architecture of the moment. So our answer to that is you don't do pastiche intervention if you are to deal with a building like that. If you want to respect those buildings well, our approach is to try to do a best shot are using the contemporary and best architecture of the moment now to help those buildings for their new life and their future life. So it's trying to not be frightened to have contrasting contemporary intervention within the existing fabric, because actually we think it's the best way of respect and give a new life for the future of this building.
I knew it was right to let you go first, Sebastien. The other thing that I was going to pick on, and you said it actually, I'm merely repeating, is actually it's not just about the building, it's about the people, it's about the history of the place, it's what people remember about it, and it's being able to put new life into these places. Battersea Power Station, as we've said, was completely inaccessible. It was devoid of life, and the prospect of being put people into the building, but also the spaces around them. I thought actually something Sebastien was going to say about the previous question. It's not just about the buildings. It's about creating a bit of breathing room around them so that people can see the buildings, that they can come to the building, they can get a sense of what the building is about and enjoy whatever may be provided inside. Yeah. So very, very human-led, I would say.
No, that's great. Matthew, maybe this question is for you.
No.
Although we do not have buildings of similar nature here in Hong Kong, how do you think the Battersea experience can likely inspire conservation projects in Hong Kong?
Well, I would argue with that. I think Hong Kong does have some extraordinary buildings, and the Battersea Power Station is a really interesting one insofar as it was built in 2 phases. And of course, a project that we're working on in Hong Kong is the main building at the University of Hong Kong, which was built in 2 phases, not dissimilar phases actually to Battersea Power Station. And it's really interesting to understand how these buildings are built over a period of time, how they change over a period of time, how additions and modifications and the rich heritage of what we look at and say, that's a significant building. It's actually something that's grown over many, many years and installed in 2 parts, changed. We sometimes talk about good heritage and bad heritage, because even though it's old, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's particularly functional or useful, and sometimes gets in the way of better parts of the building. So to be able to just understand that buildings take a long time to build, they take even longer to occupy and use, I think is really relevant. And there are some amazing buildings in Hong Kong, and we need to treat them with respect, and we need to get people back to them, and we need to understand what people remember about them. Some of them are in their original use, some of them are not in their original use. But maybe there's a way that we can reuse these buildings that is relevant and resonant to the people who remember them from their first time round.
Yeah, that resonation I think is very, very important. The memories and the view of those buildings.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One other question. This is a Grade 2 building. Are there guidelines on which you have to observe what can be touched, what can be changed, and what cannot?
Yeah, well, yes, that's a very interesting question. And we probably on Battersea Power Station have created way more amendment to the original fabric than you would normally see on the building, which is a Grade 2 star listed building. And that came across different things. Is one, the building was in a relatively bad state for a building of that age, because it's not so old actually, the building, starting to be built in the 1930s. And so that allows us to be able to justify more amendment to the building itself, because a lot of the wall, a lot of the construction were quite weak. So we could have some very interesting and constructive conversation with Historic England to enable some of the changing. The other thing is fundamentally, because the undertake for the restoration is so massive, and it's been 40 years of failure on this project. Since the 1980s, when the building was stopping being used as a power station, a lot of developers bought the site and never managed to restore it because the undertaking was too big. So there were a real drive by all parties, including the historic parties, to help make the project a success. And in order to do that, you needed to create enough activity in there to create enough fundamental revenue to make the project sustainable. So if you start from that principle, if you start from the fact that you need to bring people to live in there, to work in there, well, you have simple facts like you need to create safe environment, you need to create enough escape routes, and you need to create windows and daylight. So we needed to create a lot of changes, windows, and we have very regular meeting. Every 2 weeks, we meet Historic England and the conservation officer team from Wandsworth, which are the local authority in London in that area. And we just show them the evolution of the project, and we discuss every detail for every window, every restoration work for the column. So there's a very close relationship with the historic body to enable all those amendments. So it's always, even if there's a lot of amendments, it's always very respectfully thought through.
That's interesting. So how much research have you been doing on the building, and how was the extent, and how much time did you spend on researching the history of the building?
Well, we've been involved since 2013, so it's a long, project for an architect. It's quite a long, by the end of the full, by the time that we've opened everything, it will be about 10 years, which, arguably is long, and you could argue also very fast, because in the rest of Europe, if you were undertaking a project like that, it could take much longer. Well, the research we've done as some of the example I mentioned, the fact that we've managed to find back the original brick supplier. So we've done a lot of research of finding how to get some of the historic material in there. We did also some research, for instance, the faience inside Turbine Olay. We went to a company in Buffalo in America, the only company who could do manual tiling with actually splash of paint on them, like manually done. So all the tile, any tile that we had to replace are actually man-made and manually painted. Like, effectively you've got like an artist who comes and splash dots of color on each of the tile one by one. So a lot of research has been done to check the technique, the technology. Control room A roof is a glass ceiling with bronze frame. We had to replicate some of the components. So we had to find back a specific restoration company who could do that type of work. So it's a big adventure. We have a team of within the Wilkinson team working on a project. We've got a full restoration team, effectively. So a series of architects who've spent the past 8 years looking, documenting each of the methodology of working to try to replicate that, or to use and to make some color match for a lot of components throughout the building.
Yeah, it's amazing labor of love, actually. Yeah. Daniel would like to know more about the financial aspect of the project and how it was conceived.
So, I mean, as an architect, I can't probably tell you too much about the financial aspect, rather than the fact that effectively, the shareholder, the current shareholder, who are basically a consortium from Malaysia, bought the site back in 2011, if I'm correct, if I remember well, and they started by building phase one, which is a new residential property on the west side of the power station. That enabled that revenue by the time it was completed and people moved in. That enabled to start to be able to pay off for some of the restoration work of the power station. And part of the planning process was also that before the new intervention could be done inside the power station, the chimney had to be rebuilt, and they couldn't be demolished, the four of them at the same time. They had to demolish one by one and rebuild one by one. The reason for that is the local authority were worried that, a bit like what happened in the past and some of the failure of the previous developer, when the developer would come, start to demolish the 4 chimney and say, oh, I haven't got the money to rebuild them, so that's it. So there have been a lot of phases, an interesting story of how to secure the funding, how to secure the restoration work. So to a degree, there's a bit of a partnership between the local authority, the public sector, and the private sector. So the phase one started to fund for the repair work. Then Apple coming on board and signing a deal with Battersea has been fantastic, because that basically secured a financial aspect for about 35% of the building, because the office space is about 35%. The sales of the residential property within the building have done very well. I think a lot of people are really interested to live and to have to be part of that building. So that's really helped the development. And because effectively the building is opening up in different phases, because it's so vast, basically the money is coming in regularly. So now it starts to be a good, healthy system for the developer, for the shareholder, to get the money back slowly and certainly throughout the investment. But we're talking about a very long-term investment. It's a big master plan, these 8 phases. I remember one of the first conversations with the shareholder, and they said, you can't judge that project now. You need to think about it in 25 years, 30 years. So really, that's when you will really know a project of that scale. It's real benefits.
Yeah. No, you mentioned something about the difficulties, and it seems like you've been working very closely with the local governments as well as historic England. So the question here is any statutory difficulties that you encounter during the whole process, and what might be the biggest challenge to reborn this iconic building?
We had many challenges, no really fundamental ones, because as I said, I think everybody were working with the same goal in mind. One is to respect the building very carefully, and the other one was to make a success out of the development. So when you all work together in that way, that we didn't have fundamental challenges there. The real fundamental challenges were more coming from the state of the building. And, being able, when you do a new development, a new activity in a building like that, for instance, you need to design it for the next 60 or 100 years and give warranty. If you buy a flat in the building, you want to have a guarantee on all the fabric, give a 60 years or 100 years warranty on your flat. And that's the challenge, because some of the elements in there, some of the brickwork wall, some of the pollution in there, it's a steel frame building with brick and fill effectively. And a lot of the steel frame was rusty and very heavily rusted. So we had to basically take off the brick, restore the steelwork, and put back the brick on it. So all of those were the real challenges. Is how do you keep this building fit for purpose for the next 100 years?
Mm-hmm. So in the whole project, there are many parties involved. Which party plays the most important role in heritage conservation? Government, the owner, the citizens around, the professionals?
I don't think there's one party. I think it's a team effort, really. A project of that scale, it's all about team effort, team spirit. I think the great thing we have with us is the fact that because there were 40 years of failure on that project, everybody was keen to try to make a success out of it. And even if there were always criticism at every stage of the way that you will always have, people saying, oh no, we shouldn't touch it. It should be remaining exactly as it is. You can't create new opening on the facade. You will always have those challenges, people, against change. But, I'd love to think that we will prove them wrong in the future, because if it becomes a vibrant place, which I think it will, well, then that's the ransom of the success.
Mm-hmm. No, I remember that building when I was studying in the UK in architecture in the early 80s. So it had been so long waiting for the rebirth of the building, and then that really is a fantastic job that you have done. One question is about views of the people around London. Have you consulted the people around the site or in London, and how do you engage the local community and stakeholder?
Yeah, so that's something which has happened a lot, the consultation around the project. So the first thing is, because as I mentioned, it's a master plan in 7 phases. The first thing that the developer were very interested in is creating a real sense of place. And making sure that development wasn't going to be another of those central London development where you have mainly foreigner investment and where it's a ghost town during the week, because actually most of the flats are owned by private investor or from across the world. Because if you create such a big master plan, it's not about one building. It's about making sure that you can have all 8 phases to work and to be developed across a number of years. And if the first 1 or 2 phases are not a success, well, then you will never build the other ones. So the only way you do that is and I think that's really to the credit of to the client and the shareholder, is they decided that they wanted to create a local community. So for instance, in phase 1 in the first building, all the shops at ground floor there are all independent shops. So there's no big brand. They are all done by local shops. So there's a local kind of mini supermarket, kind of very high-end but boutique supermarket. The restaurants are all independent restaurant. There's a flower shop, which is also a kind of place where you can learn how to do some beautiful flower bouquet, and creating a school for creating flower bouquets and things like that. And that has been very clever, because effectively a lot of people across central London love to come there, because there's a different feel than other places. Also, all the public space all the public ground along the river is only pedestrian. And therefore, it's one of the only places in London like that where you have such a quiet area, for instance. And the COVID-19 period was a very interesting moment there, because it was a quiet space, only pedestrianized, and you were not allowed to meet inside. A lot of people were meeting in that public space around there. So that this sense of place and using local and wanting people to buy locally. For instance, when they launched the sales of the residential property for the power station, they started by launching it to London only first, trying to get buyer from London first. So trying to make it like something which, it's related to London before. And of course, there are foreign investors too. But it was very important for the shareholder to create a sense of place, a local place.
Thanks.
I think we said it before. It's about the people. You get the people in, you make it a living building again. It's absolutely got to be about the people who are going to use it on a day-to-day basis, and their views and their use and how they can operate within the building is fundamental.
And you want live 24 hours a day and 365 days a year. And that's why also a mixed use scheme is helpful there, because if you can recreate, work and live there, it's a good recipe to make a vibrant place.
Great. I mean, we are doing very well. We have about 4 more minutes left. There are 2 questions that are interrelated. Maybe those are the 2 last questions that we will answer. How do you reconcile between inserting new elements and preserving historic elements of the buildings? Were there stringent requirements in building preservation throughout the process? And the last one would be, may I know how the decision is made for rebuilding the chimney for installing a new lift inside? How about not to build a new lift and keep the chimney the way it was?
So, do you want to say something, Matthew?
No, I was going to say there's a lot of questions in there. I'll leave the chimney one to you, because that's got your name written all over it. I'll perhaps talk a little bit about the new and the old, because I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it sort of goes back a little bit to what I was saying earlier about these buildings developed over a very long time, and that they were built at different stages. And quite often, the history of the building is continual development and change. Sebastien spoke very passionately earlier. For somebody who's been working on the project for however many years, you've got to admire the passion that remains. Is the fact that at the time it was the best, most innovative construction possible. Nobody was trying to rebuild it how it was done 50 years ago. And I think we have to keep that mindset in terms of how we approach our buildings. I'm not saying that we knock them down and replace them with a new glass thing, but actually starting to put in new structure is quite interesting. It's of the time, it's of where we're coming from, how we want to use the building. And it also goes back to the issue about making it viable. And you can talk about making it safe, you can talk about making it usable, you can talk about making it attractive to the people who want to use it. And that sort of comes back to the making it something that is commercially viable. And we're always a bit nervous about, it's not just about money, it's about restoring these extraordinary buildings. But they've got to have a purpose. If nobody wants to go there, if nobody wants to go and see them, if nobody wants to visit them, then they'll fall into disrepair again. And that's the last thing we want. We want to create vibrant, exciting buildings that are of their era and relevant and exciting to the people who occupy them now.
Yeah, and I think it's a very good point. And there's two things which could be mentioned there. One is we live differently now, we function differently and we build building differently. So it would be kind of a bit crazy to just restore them using only the same technology, the same material for the sake of having a kind of retroactive attitude to the building environment we are in. And across the presentation, I still mentioned the fact that we've done some very careful restoration work. So it's not like we wouldn't do that. Of course we will. And some of the key aspects of the building, we want to respect them very well. But at the same time, it's all about the next 100 years of this building. It's not about only the 100 or 200 years which have just passed. It's making sure that we actually give the best chance for this building to be still at the heart of our history and of our future. And in order to do that, we need to make it fit for purpose, and whatever that purpose might be. And it needs to have a purpose. And the other thing I wanted to mention is industrial building is the next generation of our historic fabric across the world, across the globe, that we need to take care of. And it's way more challenging maybe than some of those, the church we have or the castle we have of the Middle Age, because those now have been more or less restored, or on their way to be restored. There are places that people go and visit over the weekend or over the holiday season, tourists go. So there is a kind of system in place for those. Now the next challenge that the historic bodies have is all those industrial buildings of the 20th century, which some of them are incredibly epic construction, big sheds, which is a real challenge at the moment, because a lot of them, a lot of developers are not interested to touch them because they are either contaminated or they are big structure, and actually making them fit for a new type of use is either technically complex or too expensive to do to make it to stack up financially. So I think what I'd like to think is an example like what we're doing through Battersea, or what Matthew is looking at in Hong Kong, is a way of saying, guys, okay, it's a challenge, but it's one of the most fascinating challenges that we can think of going forward, especially in an environment where it's all about sustainability, fundamental sustainability, where it's not about, oh yes, now a building is 25 years old, let's demolish and build another one. We need to be way more intelligent and clever than that. We need to think about the amazing fabric we've got around us, surrounding us, and how can we evolve it and make something better out of it with taking care about the carbon footprint of what we do, really.
Fantastic answer, I think, Sebastien and Matthew. Maybe one last question. And coming back to Hong Kong, the Castle Peak Power Station in Hong Kong is about to be retired soon, maybe in a few years. However, it is located in a very remote industrial area, and which is really far away from the city. So in terms of functions of the building, how shall the power station be restored in order to motivate people to come visit that building?
It's not, I think this one's for me, Sebastien, unless you know Castle Peak Power Station. I have to say, I don't know the building at all, and I think it sounds like a great weekend visit. I'm afraid my children get subjected to this quite often, that we go to obscure parts of Hong Kong to visit something that I'm interested in. And I think, to be honest, for me to sit here and say, I've never seen it, but we should do this, and this, I think is completely counter to everything we've said about us needing to understand the context, who uses it, how it could be used, and rather than me sort of projecting ideas on a building that I've never seen, I'll go and visit it first. And thank you for the advice or the recommendation.
So it's an exciting challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Castle Peak. I didn't know about the power station there, so we're doing some work there, but it's nothing to do with the restoration of beautiful power stations. But maybe there's opportunities. Well, there's definitely things to learn from Battersea Power Station. I'm sure it won't be exactly the same, because it'll be something much more unique and particular to Hong Kong.
Yes, great answer. I think what you made, your last point, Sebastien, about industrial heritage is the next phase of the conservation movement, and that's absolutely correct, especially in Asia. I mean, all the way from China down to Southeast Asia, we are seeing a lot of new industrial buildings being retained, repurposed, and really conserved and revitalized. I think that's a wonderful prospect for this part of the world. Yeah. So thank you very much, the two gentlemen, Matthew and Sebastien. Wonderful.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for having us.
You worked very hard. You have worked very hard. So in closing, we would like to thank all the participants in this webinar. And really, it's a very educational and exciting lecture about the process and all the works that have gone into the conservation and repurposing of Battersea Power Station. So in closing, if you would like to get more information about the latest initiatives and programs organized by the Culture for Tomorrow, feel free to visit the website or follow the Instagram or Facebook page by scanning these QR codes on the screen. And thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you all, and wish you a very good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.